World War II, the European theater. We're going to look at just Europe, and then you'll also be able to look at the Pacific on the next one. So if you guys can look here, you can see the kind of contested area. So Germany had taken over most of the places that are red. The places that are France, that's because France had fallen. Switzerland, you can see in the dead center there, they are neutral. Sweden is neutral. And then, of course, this huge red area with all these troops kind of coming in. This is Russia, but the Germans had kind of moved in here and moved up. And this is an area that's contested. So we can see contested areas that are fighting against. And then, of course, we have the United States that's going to pop in, but not so much as we're looking at Europe. So we can see that. And then, of course, we have all the Britain areas that are owned over here are working there. And then the other thing to note is that Italy at this time is with Russia, or sorry, not Russia. They're with Germany under Mussolini. So Mussolini, of course, takes Italy in, kind of works from that. And then the other thing here is British Malta and some of these little areas in there. So we have a peripheral attack, meaning they're going to attack from the edges. The United States and Britain realized that they're not necessarily equipped because they had not been fighting. They had not been building up their military. So they said, hey, why don't we go attack somewhere at the edges? So the idea was North Africa. Now, Roosevelt agreed because it would season his troops and help the British take back the Suez Canal. Now, the Suez Canal is so important because if you can get through the Suez Canal, it can take days or weeks off of time of travel. And of course, you can get goods and that kind of stuff. So not just your troops, but that is huge. So we have the Battle of North Africa. Eisenhower invades North Africa and engaged the Germans in Tanzania at the Battle of Kasserine Pass. Now, Desert Fox, also known as General Rommel, or maybe the other way there, he was the man. He just completely destroyed the United States and other forces there. He had been doing that. So he killed 7,000 and destroyed 200 tanks. Now, Eisenhower replaced his commander with George S. Patton, the famous Patton. And so by 1943, the German troops in North Africa had surrendered. The other thing to note is that Rommel was out of North Africa. So he had been called back at some point in there, and it does help when you don't have the mastermind behind the plan. So in the Atlantic, the German U-boats, also known as submarines, were sinking U.S. cargo ships. So by August 1942, 360 American ships had been sunken off the coast of the United States. And then we end up with kind of gearing up and kind of going against it. But by May and June 1942, 1.2 million tons of shipping were sunk. Now, we're trying to support Britain and all these other places. They were building more than 1.1 million tons during this time. The other thing to note is that the United States could produce like 5 ships a day. And so if they can take out 6, that's not good. But if they can take out less, that of course is good. Now, of course, we are just talking about from producing of ships or production of ships, not people and that kind of stuff. So the United States uses a convoy system, which means that they have tons of ships going together. And that helps protect a little bit. And then we get sonar. And so when we go to look at I think it's this next slide. Yes. You guys can see this is where the attacks were and kind of what was going on. But if you look here, you can see Allied merchant ships lost for each year. So as it goes on, the United States enters the war here, technically here, but really this is the full first year. We didn't enter till the December. So we end up by entering here and we have a year we're getting just hammered and then things start going down. Well, you can see that we're going to start killing more of them. And again, 1942, that's that huge jump. We enter the war and start attacking them. But then we get sonar. So when we get sonar, we're just destroying. The other thing to note about this figure is that they, A, couldn't produce as many, and B, they couldn't kind of get a few things going on. Well, they couldn't produce, but they also were, people were scared, and the United States just becomes really good at it. So it's not like our technology went down. It would have went up if they had enough ships or submarines. So the Battle of Stalingrad, this is going to be on the other side. We're looking at the Russian side. It's a strategic location because it's got all these railroads going in and out of it. And so if you connect it, you can get oil fields, factories, farmland, all for the Soviet army. And so September 1942-43 is when it happens. Stalin basically says, hold the city at all costs. Now, they just took a ton, like hundreds, thousands of Russians flood this city to go fight. Now, they're the military, but they're also not um, they're not necessarily told that they can't. They're basically said, you're going in there. If you retreat, you'll be shot. So that's a hold the city at all costs. The other thing that they did is they didn't have enough weapons. So they would give one guy a rifle and the other guy bullets. So if the guy who died with the bullets, you picked up his bullets. If the guy who died with the rifle, you would pick up his rifle and start shooting there. So November 1942, Russian reinforcements surround 250,000 Germans, and in doing so, they basically took them hostage, or whatever. And a lot of those people died in after being surrendered in concentration camps. Each side lost about 500,000 troops. There's about 1 million deaths just in that battle. This is Stalingrad. This area, you can see all these different lines coming out of here, railroads and all this kind of stuff. See how connected it is, and you can see the lines and kind of where they're working at there. So they advance to Stalingrad, which is this blue line, and then they're kind of withheld and then surrounded, and we end up with a ton of casualties. So the other thing, if we continue to look at this, you can see that the United States and Britain started dropping bombs and pamphlets and propaganda into the Nazi controlled areas. And part of that was because, one, you want to kill them to, get your stuff going. But the other thing with this is the more havoc you wreak, you can get rid of railroads, which get stuff. You can create an oil shortage, and you can destroy many aircraft factories so they can't fight against you. So they continue to just bombard and work at getting all of that kind of maneuvering. And in doing so, you can see that we go from 3,800 tons to 53,000 tons on Germany each month, which is just an insane figure. So this, of course, is going to create social unrest. And part of that is because if you believe in something and somebody starts destroying it, then you start looking and you say, maybe it wasn't all right. And so that's people who believed that Nazi was like the best and brightest way to go, maybe start seeing the true colors and that kind of stuff. Then we get the soft underbelly. So Patton and Montgomery lead Allied forces invade Sicily. They start getting in to Italy. In doing so, the people in Italy feel, hey, we can kind of revolt. So they get under Victor Emmanuel, the king of Italy, and the generals. They decide to arrest Mussolini, and they negotiate a surrender with the Allies, which of course is awesome. But the problem is Germany owns the north. So we have the change in power in Italy. Germany controls the north, as I mentioned, and they set up fortifications and Cassino. Allies land on Anzino behind the lines and hope to cut off supplies. After 5 months of fighting, there's 300,000 casualties for the Allies. So, of course, this is not good. So they have the Tehran Conference. So the big thing is you have Stalin of USSR, you have Churchill of Great Britain, and you have Roosevelt, FDR, as we call him, of the United States. Stalin will launch a full scale once the United States forces land in France. So we're going to hit them from both sides. Stalin and Roosevelt would divide Germany after. This is where we're going to get all sorts of negative things coming at the end. And then Stalin would help Roosevelt fight Japan after Germany was defeated. That's going to be the Pacific. And Stalin agreed to Roosevelt's international peacekeeping. So this is kind of looking forward and trying to get all of our ducks in a row so that we can kind of, look forward to the future. So Operation Overlord, you guys can see there, we need to land on some beaches. So there's going to be some beaches here, and we need to have troops on there and kind of take them out. We have to do some deception. So they go ahead and pick Normandy, which is part of France, but it's controlled by, of course, Germany. In doing so, they had to time the tides right. They had to pick, so they actually were supposed to go some different dates, but the weather was not good, so they chose to go later. That's why it's called D-Day, because we didn't know the actual day until well, it was going to happen. So 1.5 million soldiers, 12,000 airplanes. They dropped the soldiers behind enemy lines, and 5 million tons of equipment. It is the largest amphibious landing in history. So on this, you have 7,000 ships carrying over 100,000 troops, and they needed to clear Normandy Beach. So you can see we have 200 casualties in Utah, 2,500 Omaha, Gold is 1,000 in Sword, and then Juneau is 961 casualties. These are from people running. If you've seen Saving Private Ryan, that's supposed to be a pretty kind of common depiction, or what people said. It was actually so real that a lot of people, at least at starting, were like traumatic. They had kind of backflashes and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that first part of Saving Private Ryan is pretty historically accurate. And then you have edge rows, and you guys can see the picture to the right. It's basically just this thing to keep in the cattle, and it was built in. The problem is that it's tough to go through it. You can go through a fence, but this is kind of like a berm, and so we had to bomb those to get them out, and that creates a really good defensive line for the German soldiers. But finally, by July 25th, that's over a month. You can see June 6th, but by July 25th, 1944, we had bombed holes through them so that we could get kind of get up and maneuvering in. So the Battle of the Bulge. It's a German offensive attempting to cut off Allied supplies and coming through. They were actually pretty stinking successful because they caught the Americans off by surprise. So this dotted line is where the Americans were. And then this is December 25th. The Bulge is, our Bastogne is right here. So we have this line comes here. And then by the end of it, 5 days later, that we had gained some ground in some places, but also lost a ton of ground. And you can see here, they completely have Bastogne completely encircled, which is not good for the United States. So what ends up by happening at this place is they send in this letter. This German send this letter and basically say, hey, we don't want to kill you all. We want you guys to live, go back home. They didn't want the United States to fight. And they were going to completely destroy the U.S. in this battle. And they said, hey, if you guys are cool with it, you'll just leave, surrender to us, and we'll, whatever. And so, like, obviously they send this thing, said 2 hours, we're going to come in and get you. Well, the general, or the commander in charge, which is McAuliffe's formal response was the one word nuts, which is like kind of crazy considering the fact that they don't know what it means. And well, what does that mean when you translate it? Like, you're not going to do anything. It's not like, hey, we're not going to come and fight us. It's just nuts. So the United States ends up by holding it. Within 3 days, Patton, the famous Patton, counters the German offensive and rescues 101st Airborne. And in doing so, we won the Battle of the Bulge, inflicting 100,000 casualties for the Germans. And then with the victory in Europe with the Battle of the Bulge and losing of Poland and Russia, Germany was running out of reinforcements. By April 30th, Hitler had killed himself. And then by May 7th, Germany accepted the unconditional surrender. So that would be VE Day, Victory Europe, and we'll get to VJ Day with that in Japan. That being said, I hope you guys can get to the quiz and have a great rest of your day.